let's get started. Hi, I'm Young Pham. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for CIT. As always, welcome to the Mobile Deposit Benchmark Report. We're excited. This is the 5th year of this. I'll turn it over to our speakers today, Ron Shevlin, as well as Mike Diamond from Mitek.
Thanks, Young. Hey, everybody. It's Mike Diamond from Mitek, and I wanted to start off with just a couple introductory words before I turn it over to Ron. Thanks a lot for joining again. This is the 5th consecutive year that Mitek has sponsored this Mobile Deposit Benchmark Report. And I wanted to talk to you a bit about the report and why we do it. So number one of our corporate values at the company is just learning. And as we focus on learning, activities like this and taking a pulse on what's happening out there in the market is important. But also part of learning is disseminating information back to folks and sharing it. So that's one important part of it when we embarked on this 5 years ago. The other thing is that when you think about a report, you think about something that's sort of rearward facing or present day facing, and that it's something that we look at what happened or what's happening. But one of the things that's become apparent in a way a lot of financial institutions have used this report is that it's a forward facing, future facing tool to improve customer experience of a mobile deposit transaction. I was talking to one bank who was disappointed with where they were in the rankings. And by the way, CIT and Cornerstone do the work. We just sponsor it, but they were disappointed on where they were in terms of their limits that they have, and the limits there at that particular bank was lower than a lot of their peer group, and they got docked for it in the report. But instead of being upset about it, what the bank did is they used that internally to indicate to the rest of the folks in the risk and compliance part of the bank about the advantages and kind of what the market is doing. And so I hope that a lot of you are using this report the same way as a tool to improve the service that you deliver. A reminder that mobile deposit is a big driver for digital banking usage in the first place, and digital banking usage in itself also drives higher net promoter scores. It's that line between mobile deposit right up to higher net promoter scores is really important. So as banks are looking towards the digital future, that driving that mobile deposit number is really important. And when I talk about the digital future, in a lot of ways, that future has been forced upon us by this global pandemic. And since we started this report 5 years ago, I have to say that the quality of the mobile deposit applications that are available have risen considerably across the board. Everybody's doing a great job. We look at about the top 20, about 20 banks or so. Everybody in there, no matter where they're at in any given year, in terms of being at the top or in the middle or towards the back, everybody's raising their game. And the work in doing that has really prepared the industry in a lot of ways for this unprecedented pandemic. So the last thing I'll just say before we get started here is I often ask banks, what's your number? Now, you remember for an ING commercial back in the day where consumers were walking around with their, proposed what they thought their retirement number ought to be. The what's your number thing really applies nicely to our industry as well. Everybody involved with mobile deposit in a financial institution should absolutely know what their number is. And the number I'm talking about is the percentage of all check deposits that come in via the mobile channel. And that number is steadily increasing across the industry and has taken a big jump forward in this seminal moment of the pandemic, which has forced a lot of people to finally get on the mobile deposit train. And a lot of those people are never going to get off of that. And so driving that number upward up to eventually, how high can it go? I don't know, 50%, 60% of all checks, I'm not sure. But it certainly can be a lot higher than it is today. And this was a great opportunity to bring a lot of people on board. So this is a particularly important year to talk about that. So with that, let me turn it over to my friend and our guest here, Ron Shevlin, and let Ron get us started. Ron.
Thanks, Mike. And thanks a lot for having us help you with doing this. This is the 2nd year that I and Cornerstone have been involved. We inherited this from the work that Jim Van Dyke from Shevlin was doing a couple years ago, and following in Jim's shoes is pretty big task. So we're pleased to be able to kind of work on this and help you with this, and to get everybody just up to speed on what we're going to cover today. We've really broken out the agenda into 3 pieces. I want to discuss a little bit what's going on from a consumer perspective. The headline here is that, as you kind of alluded to, Mike, The pandemic was a watershed year for mobile deposit, and we'll get into that by sharing some of the results from a consumer survey that we fielded. Then we'll get into the rankings, talk about what we found for this year, some of the new leaders and some of the new ranking dynamics, and close out with a look ahead and discuss what we see as sort of a mobile deposit personalization challenge. I do want to emphasize to everybody who is attending that please use the Q&A button, whether it's, I think it's at the bottom of your screen, it's at the top of mine now because I'm sharing a screen, so I think yours would be at the bottom. And at any time, please shoot in questions. We'll be monitoring that. We'd like to get to those questions in context if we can versus waiting till the end. So please don't hesitate at any point if you have questions of Mike or myself or anybody or about anything. So please get those in there at any time. Before, though, I get into the consumer perspective, I do want to talk a little bit about the research methodology. A lot of the work, as Mike alluded to here, was done by CI&T, a digital strategy and design agency, who accessed the live deposit accounts for 20 of the largest financial institutions, not just banks, as Mike mentioned, but Navy Federal Credit Union is in there as well. During, I guess, Q3 of 2020, August and September. You can see on the right-hand side the heuristics that were gauged and tested and assessed for each of the mobile deposit apps. There were 2 policy areas and 6 user experience categories. And I certainly encourage everyone to download the report, take a look at the detailed descriptions of each of these heuristics and all of the detailed scoring for each of the 20 participating unwilling or willingly participating financial institutions. And then finally, to kind of look at the other side of the coin from not just the institution perspective, but from the consumer perspective, we fielded a survey of US adults, representative of the overall population in terms of age, gender, and race. We ended up with just under 2,000 participants or respondents, so I think a pretty good sample size. And we looked at the attitudes, the usage, and the behavioral reactions to mobile deposit and mobile banking. So to kind of share the headline, I mean, clearly, as Mike had alluded to, 2020 was a year like no other, obviously, and that certainly impacted mobile banking and mobile deposits specifically. Thanks to the closing of a lot of branches across the country, that really forced a change on consumer behavior. And those numbers, and that is reflected in the numbers of users. This year, we found that 40% of mobile banking users had made at least one mobile deposit through 2020. And to give you a sense for how that changed, Cornerstone every year does a benchmark report looking at mid-sized financial institutions. And from both a bank and credit union perspective, in the most recent year, which was 2019 that we looked at, both banks and credit unions were averaging at about 20% adoption of consumers in terms of mobile deposits. So we're looking at almost a doubling. So we're interested in getting your perspective here on what's happened in your institution. So let me pop up the first polling question, if you will. We'd love to know what % growth in mobile deposit transactions, not in consumer adoption per se, but in terms of the number of transactions, did you see in your organization for 2020? So I've got a little counter here. I don't know if you can see the counter or not. So please select one of these answers, and when we get to a good number of attendees, I'll end the poll. And else, can actually people see it, Young? Can they see the numbers?
No, Ron, we'll share it after we end the poll. They'll be able to see it then.
Okay, so when I click end poll, people will be able to see it.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike, you want to take any guesses which will be the most frequent answer here?
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people are actually saying to themselves right now, I actually don't know what the answer to that is. But I think it's okay to take a guess. I have to believe at least 10%, and probably higher, in all cases. So I have to believe that I would guess we'd be in the top 3. But
all right, I'm going to give it just 10 more seconds here as we get to a good number. Since I think people are pretty much got it answered. Okay, I'm going to stop the poll now. And 26 to 49%. So basically almost half, Mike, said 25% or greater, with 15% saying it was 50% or, but as you guessed, there were a bunch who didn't know. So, actually, if we recalculated everything and took it out of the base, I think our attendees here are seeing some significant growth in terms of mobile transactions, deposit transactions rather. And it's hard to say because we don't know right now who's on the line, but got to imagine that these are good mix of people from decent sized organizations where the number of mobile deposit transactions was already pretty high. So to see 50% more or even 26 to 49% is pretty impressive. Oh, did I not share results yet? You guys couldn't see that, right?
No, we saw that. I saw.
Oh, okay, good. All right, let me close that off because I had another button that said share results. The other thing I want to point out here from the consumer perspective is that among consumers who did use mobile deposit in 2020, more than 4 out of 10 did so for the first time. And that's pretty significant. We always have seen in the past, and not just with mobile deposit, but with mobile banking, with online banking, online bill pay, you name it, whatever's come out, there have always been slow adopters and people who have said, I will never use this. And so we've got a very significant number of people in 2020 who said, okay, they pretty much had to do something and adopted, maybe they were already mobile banking users, but clearly said they got to make the leap here and use mobile deposit in 2020, and 40% of the users were first-time users.
Hey, Ron, that's kind of interesting how closely that mirrors what we just saw in terms of that poll result.
Yeah. Which kind of begs the question, Mike, will these consumers continue to use mobile deposit? You want to weigh in? What's your take on that? You're on. You went back on mute.
I think I know the answer because we have it in our results. But I think a very high percentage of people are never going to go back. They're just never going to go back once you've used it. By the way, just a quick story. I talked to somebody who is a wealth advisor for one of the largest banks in the country, and he said he's spending during the COVID, during this time, he said he's spending most of his time teaching people how to use mobile deposit for the first time. And he said almost every single time he does it, people are like, oh my God, this is so easy. Why wasn't I doing this before? They almost always say that exact phrase. This is so easy. Why wasn't I doing that before? So we're going to have a lot of these people are never going to go back to going to the branch with their checks.
Well, let's get the view of the attendees. I don't want to overload you. We'll have a few more polling questions, but there's just a couple here that kind of popped up at the top. Let's see. Where's I have to actually see. Okay, so for those of you attending, what % of users who use mobile deposit for the first time in 2020 do you expect will continue with the service? And some of the answers are coming in, and Mike, I can tell you that just previewing some of this, I think you're absolutely right, and everybody agrees that we're going to see some pretty sticky service here, which is going to be good. All right, I'm going to, I'll wait 5 more seconds to, okay, I think we're good. You guys can see the results. Half think it's going to be 75% or greater. You add in the 33% who said between 50 and 74%, and we're at a very high percentage rate. Would love to know why some of the folks thought that it would only be 25 to 50%, because this is kind of typical you've seen with a lot of other types of features and capabilities from a technology perspective, not even a mobile perspective, is that once they get over the hump of trying something the first time, get walked through it and helped, then they realize, wow, this really is a lot easier than what I've done in the past. and they build a level of satisfaction with it. I do think, though, Mike, that there still needs to be continual improvement to ensure that these new users stay on board. And we may talk a little bit about that when we get into some of the rankings and the dynamics of what was driving some of the rankings this year. All right. The other thing I wanted to kind of highlight, or one of the other things I want to highlight from the consumer perspective, is how important mobile deposit has become as a mobile banking feature. We asked the respondents to the survey how important are various mobile banking capabilities, and took out some of the things like checking your account balance and transferring funds, some of the basics, really looking more at some of the advanced features. Probably and hopefully no surprise that things like turning card off and on, or reporting it lost, or managing balance and fraud alerts was critical, or at least important to a very wide majority of users here and consumers. But perhaps more surprising is that across these range of features, deposit checks was mentioned as critical, or at least important, by 7 out of 10 respondents. So, I don't know that we asked this question exactly the same way last year when we fielded the survey. So I can't really say that this kind of crept up in the rankings per se, but really kinds to show that and emphasizes just how critical a feature mobile deposit has become for mobile banking users. Any comments you want to make on this, Mike?
I would say no surprise on that.
Yeah. And to emphasize the importance and the usage, we asked in 2020 what % of the checks you received were deposited using a mobile device, and nearly half of respondents who were using mobile deposit, that is, said that they had deposited at least 3/4 of their checks. You add in the folks who did at least half, so we've got more than half of mobile deposit users who are depositing more than half. And we did ask about why didn't you deposit checks using the mobile deposit feature when you did, and it really was a convenience thing. It wasn't a usability type of thing. It was, hey, they were near the branch, which might have been open, or may have just done it through ATM. It was more of a convenience aspect, not a critique or conscious decision to not do it through the mobile device. And if I were to break this out by generation, you'd see some big differences among the Gen Zers and the millennials, where the percentages who had deposited at least 3/4 of their check is even higher. And in fact, when we asked also what would get you to deposit more of your checks with your mobile device, two things kind of pop to the top here, and this is very reflective of what we've seen over the past couple of years, and very reflective of the rankings as well, is that there's two things that really kind of drive both the rankings as well as utilization, and that's user interface and design and policies. And obviously faster access to cash is one of the top reasons mentioned by a little over half of the consumers who were surveyed as to what would get them to deposit more of their checks. And then better ease of use, which is kind of a very broad term. And I don't think it's so much that the user interface is poor. I think this really alludes to things like alerts and notifications. Mike, do you have other interpretations of the better use of ease of use response?
Yeah, first of all, I agree with you. It's incredibly broad. I believe that if somebody tries to deposit 10 checks over the course of a time period, a couple weeks, a couple months, whatever it happens to be, and 9 of those go great, and one of them they have a problem with, that's the thing that kind of logs and kind of locks into their mind. And so that better ease of use can be something as simple as some experience that didn't go well with the bank, with the interaction. Well, that's one of the reasons over the course of the years we put a lot of work into the auto capture, right? So that hovering the phone over the check kind of makes it so much easier to get a great image and make sure that we're adhering to all the Check 21 regulations and obligations downstream. But so that's kind of what I think happens. I think that when people get kind of like they want a bad experience, they put better ease of use. One thing that surprises me on this a little bit is the higher deposit limits only being 25%, which if anybody on this webinar who looks at their app store ratings knows that this is a common complaint by their customers. So I suspect that that's maybe a little bit underrepresented compared to what I interpret, but it's interesting to see the data nonetheless.
So I think, Mike, I agree with you here, except I interpret the last piece a little bit differently. I think if we were to ask what are the dissatisfiers you experience with mobile deposit limits would probably be a whole lot more than 25%.
Right.
But the question here was really about what would get you to deposit more of your checks. And if there were higher deposit limits, then they put more checks in. I don't know, maybe I'm just
that's a great point.
This around. But it's interesting, the third and fourth answers, while not as frequently cited as the first two, kind of reflect this design and policy, the sort of yin yang thing. Assurance that the check was deposited was really a user interface type of thing, and the higher deposit limits being more about the policy. The last feature is really more about security. And interestingly, I think as time goes by and usage goes up, the resistance to utilizing mobile deposit and mobile banking and everything in the first place, that's driven by fears of security and fraud and things like that, tend to lessen. But that's not to say necessarily that the financial institutions aren't experiencing fraud. And we'd like to kind of get you, the attendees, your take on what you're seeing from a fraud perspective. To what extent is your organization experiencing a problem with check fraud? Is it a growing problem and has become significant? Is it growing but not yet significant? Growing but big enough to cause some concern? Not growing, not a big problem. Is it declining? Do you see no fraud, or do you not even know? So if you would just take a second here and let us know the extent to which you're experiencing problems with check fraud. Now I'm going to wait here to get some more people to register their answer. We need like hold music, Mike, like little Jeopardy music. I'm not going to sing.
Hey, Ron, while people are waiting, I would encourage the attendees also to submit their questions and answers also in the bottom of their screen. So please feel free to continue to do that.
All right, a couple more people weighing in here. Okay.
You have to phrase your answer in the form of a question, Ron. No, because of the Jeopardy.
Not me. I'm Alex Trebek here. I don't have to do anything.
All right.
Let's see the results here. Kind of all over the map, Mike. There's about a quarter who don't know their organization's check fraud issues. Very few, though, who say it's declining, isn't a problem, or don't see it at all. But we've got about
Ron, I'm not seeing the results.
Oh, okay. I will share results.
There we go.
How's that?
There we go. Yep.
There we go. Good. So we got about a third at the top there, 17 plus 17%, who say it's growing. Half of that who say it's significant, and half to say it's not a significant problem yet, but see it growing. And I guess actually, if we throw in the third one, we've got about half who say that the check fraud is growing to some extent, and it's big enough now to cause them some concern. 13% who say it's basically flat, and very few who say that it's declining or not at all. So any thoughts, Mike, on what folks should be doing in terms of the fraud problem?
Yeah, the industry numbers are that check fraud is very, very much on the increase. Checks are declining, as we know, but check fraud is increasing. There's a few reasons for that. One of them is the prevalence of EMV chips out there has pushed a lot of card present fraud back to the check route. You also have a lot of work from home scams and all the rest of it, along with stimulus payments, and those things are actually driving check fraud upwards.
Excellent. All right. Gonna stop sharing on this one. Let's take a look, Mike, and move to the rankings and talk about the new mobile deposit rankings, who the new leaders are, and what was driving that. And we'll also kind of highlight some of the leaders and show exactly what they're doing well. So this year we have a new leader. US Bank has jumped from pretty good, no, actually US Bank is the new leader, jumping from number 4 in 2020 to number 1 this year. We'll highlight this in a little bit, but they've made some significant changes over the years, evolving both design and policy. Last year, it was kept out of the top 3 because of its check retention policy, which is now on par with the rest of the leaders. That should be an S at the end of that word. Apologize for that typo. And so all in all, they've kind of jumped now from number 4 to number 1. And I also want to highlight big gainer. Fifth Third jumped 7 places from number 10 to number 3, cracking the top 3 this year, thanks to some deposit limit adjustments, ranking it so at $50,000. They've also have really shown over the past great promise with the user interface, but its limits were low. Check retention period was high, which kept it out of the top 10. And this year, with its changes, they've made some adjustments and get them up in the rankings. Well, I'm going to highlight the top 5, but before I do, Mike, anything you wanted to comment on this?
Yeah, this is, like I said at the beginning, I just think everybody's done such an incredible job. And one of the things I've noticed over the years of this report is that certain financial institutions have like a really big year in terms of like they're rolling out some big new UX sort of a thing and all that, and they jump up and then push some others down. And then the next year, some of those, they kind of, their big years the next year, and they roll something out. And so you see a lot of jockeying around of different results. This sounds like a strange metaphor, but I always kind of equate this, like there's a difference between absolute improvement and relative improvement. And I use the example of like USA basketball and in international basketball. You've got there's a point in time where the USA kind of was almost awarded the international championship, whether it's the Olympics or whatnot. But over time now, the USA has got a much stiffer competition. It's not because the players for USA basketball are worse. It's because all the players from all the other countries, are that much better and have gotten better faster. And so everybody's a lot more competitive. And I think that we see that sort of dynamic at play here.
Yeah, and as we go through the top 5, I think we're really going to see that from a user design perspective. The game really has the bar really has been raised from a user design, user interface perspective, and we'll see some examples of that. The other thing I'd want to note here in terms of some of the rankings, we have continued to look separately at SunTrust and BB&T, and I think going into next year, we've decided that we'll be looking at Truist. But for right now, we're looking at SunTrust and BB&T separately, both of whom have made jumps this year. So it'll be interesting to see in 2022 what happens when we combine that. So let's look at some of the leaders and what they're doing. Oh, before we do that, I did want to point out sort of the heat map where we look at the heuristics and kind of make a judgment of sort of who's in the green doing well versus yellow or darker yellow in terms of not as well, or red at kind of at the bottom. So you can see that even US Bank, the purpose of this is to really look at the heuristics and see where the level of differentiation is. First of all, everybody now has auto capture function. Everybody doing pretty much on par from a deposit status update perspective. But you really begin to see where the differences can be made. I mean, clearly we talk about deposit limits, but I think more importantly, from some of the user interface types of things, Error and prevention is a real differentiator. See, even among some of the leaders like Fifth Third and SunTrust, where they're lagging a bit on that, and Citibank, which kind of dropped a little bit in the rankings, being hurt by poorer, not necessarily poor, but poorer error and prevention capabilities. Match between system and users world, and that's an area that is really about utilizing language and guiding people through the process. And we can see that there are a number of banks where they could be doing a better job on that. Efficiency of use tends to be very green, which means that a lot of the banks have kind of got that nailed. But it's some of the policy decisions and a couple of the user interface areas and heuristics that really offer the opportunity to not just jump in the rankings, but to kind of differentiate their capabilities from the competition. So we do see some of the commonalities among the laggards in terms of error prevention measures and some of the user interface dialogues that don't clearly instruct consumers what to do, and how important the policy decisions are to the rankings themselves. So let's take a look now finally at some of the leaders. US Bank, very clear defined design, clear icons this year, very strategic information flow. They've moved to a left aligned pattern that we believe stands them apart from a lot of the competition. One of the things I want to highlight here that I think is pretty unique, you can see it towards the top part of the image. There is a button that says I have a federal tax refund or stimulus check. And so not only does it identify that, but it excludes that check against their monthly limits. And so that I think made things very easy for a lot of US Bank clients, and is a feature that I think really differentiated them. Mike, anything you want to comment on US Bank?
US Bank would be an example of a financial institution that put a ton of work into a whole new release, a new architecture, all the rest of it. So it's, I was, when I saw these results, I was not surprised, given that. So that's kind of the example I was talking about, is like you get a financial institution putting a lot of effort, around a big rollout. And so that's what they've done. And they've raised the bar across the industry as a result.
Yeah, and I think we should highlight too that we've talked a lot about how limits and cutoff times are important. Well, they've kind of made it always visible, and a lot of the navigation occurs on a single screen, which reduces clicks, which increases user satisfaction with using the capabilities. JP Morgan Chase, we also have done a lot of work over the past couple of years from a redesign perspective. Deposit checks is up front when opening the Chase app. So they're really highlighting that, recognizing and reflecting how important that capability has become to consumers, especially over the past year or so. Minimal appearance, unique design and look, text and data are very easy to read and consume. And they've also made the limits very prominent throughout, with a 2-day check hold time that is displayed once the check is deposited. They have been, I think, in the top 5 at least of the rankings for a good number of years now. So they're putting a lot of effort into this. Any comment, Mike, or just keep going?
Keep going. Yep.
Fifth Third, again, another company has made a lot of changes, especially from a user design perspective, and again from an aesthetics perspective, a lot of differences and a lot of improvement. A very classy mobile experience, very easy deposit process. From a policy perspective, they've cut the check hold time down to 5 days, significantly down from what they had at 14 for the previous years. And their personal deposit limits now at 50,000 basically ties them for the highest. So a lot of changes both from a design and policy perspective, and a very slick experience on the part of Fifth Third. So kudos to them for really changing the experience here. SunTrust, again, a lot of changes from an aesthetics perspective. we called it, a sense of elegance and class that not many of the banks possess. The mobile deposit option in the menu provides users with the ability to make it deposits as well as identify limits, deposit history, right up front, bringing a lot of the functionality right to the core. Again, smart design, recognizing how important this has become to consumers, and with a very slick design. Sorry, I didn't mean to go off of that so quickly. Capital One also has been leaders, top 3, at least top 5 for most of the years that we've done this study. And a couple of things that kind of really differentiate them. First is their check hold time alerts. Now, while the app suggests that users hold on to the check until it appears in their account in 2 days, Capital One is sending an alert soon after the deposit is made, confirming the transaction and letting users know they can destroy the check, although they recommend that you don't. The other differentiator was a really interesting tutorial for first-time users on how to proceed, which makes it easy to copy the motion, know what to do. So a very interesting way of kind of recognizing that a lot of the users were new, they need help for it. How do you keep them from flooding the call center and the contact center or even branch personnel with questions? A great tutorial that animates and actually shows people what to do. And I think that's going to be super helpful in making sure that Capital One retains the new users that it has, because let's face it, you do something once, somebody walked you through it, the next time you do it, it's a month later, who remembers? So, you don't want to necessarily call somebody up again, but that animation, I think, is going to really help them. So that's some of the rankings from a top 5 perspective. Mike, did you want to make any final comments about that before we move ahead?
No, Ron.
Okay, so let's look ahead. What's going to come over in the next couple of years? I think obviously we're continuing to see a lot of user interface design improvements as things get more slick, more well designed, as well as this jockeying back and forth between policy limits. But I think there's a trend that's kind of growing here that we're going to constantly see this flip-flop in the rankings. So what's going to really distinguish and separate the certain banks from the pack? And we think it's really about personalization of the mobile deposit capabilities, from both a user design and policy perspective. From a user design perspective, I think it's great that Capital One has this deposit animation, but at some point in time, people don't need to see that anymore. So, this growing and learning of the app itself, almost like an infusing of AI type capabilities that says, at a certain point of utilization and tenure with an app, we can change up the user interface itself and what features and functions are shown, start making smarter decisions about the policy limits so that they're not one size fits all. Mike, any thoughts on what we'll continue to see here in terms of the level of personalization?
Well, I think personalization also ties to limits, right? Smart limits. Who are you specifically? What do I know about you specifically? The payments industry has been great in terms of taking advantage of that over the years, but and I see this evolution where limits used to be really a crude one-size-fits-all tool, and now you see financial institutions being a lot more shrewd and assigning different limits to different types of populations and customers.
Yeah, so let's ask the attendees, Mike, what they see as some of the enhancements that they plan to make going forward, and specifically in 2021. So I know we realize that there's probably multiple things that you will be doing to enhance your mobile deposit capabilities this year. But if you would, select the one that you think will be the highest priority for mobile deposit enhancements in 2021.
And as a reminder, we've got a couple of questions in, but we should be ending the presentation partly and going to the Q&A.
Yeah, I think right after this, Young,
Yep.
I'll ask you to kind of shepherd the Q&A aspect. Okay, I'm going to end the poll, share the results. New features and functions are the most important for about half of the respondents, Mike. 3 out of 10 will make a change to the mobile application interface. Fewer are going to change policies like deposit limits and so forth. But to your point earlier about how important the alerts and updates are, that's also 3 out of 10. And then fewer will focus on consumer education and marketing. And then a handful or so who are just not sure. So, new features, functionality, I think is going to be super important here. And I think so do a lot of the attendees.
Yeah, let me just toss something, a plug-in for improve alerts and updates. All of us are interested in the industry and in mobile deposit, but all of us are also users of mobile deposit, I assume. And the financial institution that I work with has awesome alerts, because one of the things that there's a big psychological relief, excuse me, of mobile deposit, where we have a ton of to-dos in our lives and we want to get something off the to-do list. And if you do a mobile deposit and it goes into what feels like sort of a black hole, or your financial institution says, well, you can always check on your mobile app to see if the funds landed in your account, that's not a good answer. And so kind of saying, hey, we got it, I'm sending you a notification, okay, those funds are good, that kind of a thing. That is a really powerful motivator, and it gives people that psychological, okay, I can cross that off my mental to-do list. I am completely done with that. So I'm sure that a lot of other financial institutions are looking for ways to really pick up their game in that respect and give people the comfort that they're looking for, that they had a successful interaction with their digital bank.
Yeah, actually, my bank isn't as good at that, and I wish they were, because that would allow me to not have to always deal with my wife's question. Hey, did that check clear yet? Did that check clear yet? Right. So, to my bank, and you should be able to figure it out, can you fix that, please?
Right. Yeah, because in my case, I get two notifications on my phone. I'll get a thing saying basically, we've got your check and are processing it. And then I get get a notification a little bit later saying, the check is cleared and funds are available.
Great.
That's great. Yeah.
So before we go to the Q&A, Young, we just wanted to share what we think are some of the key takeaways from this year's study. Mike alluded to this at the beginning, but I do want to reiterate this as a key takeaway. That look, mobile deposit has now become a critical component. It was growing already over the past couple of years, but now we see that it's clearly a transition to be one of the most critical components of mobile banking satisfaction. And mobile banking satisfaction is a critical component of overall customer satisfaction. So, there is a direct link here between, the user experience and user perceptions of the quality of mobile deposit, to their overall satisfaction with the bank. We've seen that growing over the past couple of years, but I think it's kind of crossed that line now, where we really do see that direct connection. And I think it's another reason why I call 2020 a watershed year. It's not just about adoption, but really about the importance of this. Now, there's a lot of things and critical things that will drive satisfaction and so forth. But there are things that when it's really about almost the opposite. When something goes wrong, it's disproportionate. And the same with mobile deposit. When things don't go right with the experience, then it causes like a lot of hassles and issues. So, key takeaway is that this is continuing to grow as a critical component of mobile banking satisfaction, and really the direct connection now to overall satisfaction. Number two, kind of piggybacking on the new users. Look, new users do intend to keep using mobile deposit. You believe that? Our survey showed that a very high percentage of new users expect to continue using it, but the quality of the experience has to continually improve, to continue to keep them engaged and to continue that they're driving. The quality of the experience will increase incrementally with user interface and policy changes as we see year over year. But to really kind of get that step function increase, we think there needs to be some, really out of the box thinking from a personalization perspective, which, I'd have to say, Mike, will create temporary competitive advantages, but people will follow their, they'll catch up to the others. But I do think that they'll be able to, the leaders will be able to create some temporary competitive advantages by having, features that the others will take more time to be able to copy. So I'd like to get your thoughts on that too, and also like you to kind of talk a little bit about the Mitek mobile deposit health check.
Sure, absolutely. So on this, on these key takeaways, I want to really challenge people here. When I say what's your number, the point of it isn't just to know what your number is. The point is to push yourself to a higher number. If you're at 20%, to plant the flag inside your organization and say, we got to get to 33%. If you're at 15%, say, why aren't we at 25%? These sorts of questions. And so that's really going to be important. The other thing too is just a reminder, we don't even mention it that often because it's taken for granted. Every time somebody decides to use mobile deposit, instead of walking into one of your financial centers or branches, the financial institution experiences great operational cost reduction. And then, of course, higher net promoter scores associated with use of a digital banking app. So if I were an executive at a financial institution, and I think it's a good thing that I'm not, but if I were, I would certainly be expecting my team to tell me, hey, listen, we just got a whole bunch of new users. Like this whole 2020 thing, what happened? This was incredible. And here's our strategy for keeping them on our digital banking tools, right? That's going to be really important. And I would look for that. And I would expect people in my institution to have that strategy put together and to articulate it that way. Hey, we just had a bunch of new users just drop in our lap. We've been killing ourselves the last few years to get these people to use it. Now suddenly they're using it. How are we going to make sure we keep them using it? And then on the Mitek mobile deposit health check, and we can talk about one of the questions that was posed here about different checks that you have trouble capturing. The Mitek mobile deposit health check is something that we offer in conjunction with our partners, where we help their financial institutions get the best results. We're really great at a really specific, very difficult to achieve technical task, and so as a result, we have a lot of insights into how to tune systems to make sure that they're optimal and optimized for accepting the checks that it ought to be accepting, and not accepting for the checks it should not be accepting for. So, in case in point, the technology works great with business and corporate checks, and if anybody's having trouble with that, certainly that's something that a health check might be able to uncover some of the reasons for that. And Young, maybe let me just go into that question more broadly, if I can.
Sure.
So one of the things we've been hearing in the industry for a while, issues with non-standard checks. California appears to have settled on the lowest cost producer of check stock for a lot of their warrant checks that caused problems because they were non-conforming, that check stock. So we listened to that. And so our most recent release, Mobile Deposit 4.8, has a capability in there called MIC special processing, whereby when we know the RTN number of a particular group of checks, we put that in the special processing engine and are able to pass those through according to those rules. So one of the things that those of you who are on this webinar who are interested in this is just to check in with your partners on Mobile Deposit 4.8. That's the most recent version from us. And back over to you, Young and Ron.
Great.
Mike, I think we have a follow-up question, which I think is interesting. Does any bank offer the possibility of depositing via chatbot?
I haven't run across that yet. One of the things that we are doing is we have a capability where we can use our MySnap, which is kind of the auto capture thing, use that in a web environment. So, really MySnap is predominantly used in a native environment, but it can be used in a web environment. We do some of that with some of our charitable organizations. One of the things that people on this call might not know is that Mitek does a lot of work in supporting charities who want to have people collect checks as part of an event. So Autism Speaks might have a big event, the Alzheimer's folks, the American Heart Association, all those folks will ultimately use our technology. And so we use web capabilities because in those cases, they're not downloading a native app. I don't know how that ties in necessarily to a chatbot, but that's an interesting question. And I'm sure somebody's got the answer to it that's not a panelist. And so I'll probably find out a couple minutes after this is over with. Hey, if you have any of those questions, you can just, I'm sure there's some contact info that they have for me. Shoot me an email at mdiamond@mitechsystems.com and I'll be happy to get you the answer.
Yeah, we got a couple minutes left. Are there any other questions that came in we should address?
Yeah, Ron, there's one that's followed up from what I think Mike talked about relative to the non-standard checks, but anything relative to small business, or how are you guys seeing that industry play out relative to mobile deposit there?
I'll weigh in quickly and let you, Mike, follow up, but I think it's very important from a couple of aspects. First of all, I will tell you that in the annual survey I do of mid-sized bank and credit union executives, one of the highest priorities in terms of a deposit and payments perspective this year is small business growth, both from a deposit and a deposit account perspective. And clearly the technology is a real differentiator. The mobile and online banking is a big differentiator. They're often, of course, looking for a provider who will lend them money, but for many they don't necessarily have an immediate need for loans, and so they're the distinguishing features of which they're looking for a particular institution falls to the technology. And then once they're there, and even for existing customers, you talk about the personalization of the capabilities. I hear a lot of small business owners complain that the limits, especially from a deposit and the deposit limits perspective, is a real dissatisfier. So you talk about the personalization aspects of mobile deposit. I think it's a really big differentiator for helping them to grow their small business relationships.
Right. I think I'll add on to that and just say, man, it is growing. It's a huge differentiator. It's different. It's a different group than the retail user. And it's a great way for banks to offer a really compelling service to their SMB customers out there. And I'll say another thing, there's a growing array of digital attackers to financial institutions who are exposing a potential weakness in this area. If you think about Square and Stripe and Wave and so forth. And so I think that financial institutions would be, again, back if I were running this mythical financial institution, probably that would be one strategy that I'd be very much looking for from my team.
And with that, I think we're getting close to the top of the hour, and I want to make sure that everybody can get to their next meetings and calls. I guess you're not going anywhere to those meetings or calls probably, but at least logging into them. So on behalf of Mitek, Mike, I want to thank you and Mitek for the opportunity to help you with the benchmark report. I want to make sure everybody goes to the Mitek site to download it. Again, that's mitechsystems.com. If anybody has questions for Mike or myself that we weren't able to address, you can reach Mike at mdiamond@mitechsystems, or myself at rshevlin@crnrstone.com, or on Twitter is also a great place to reach us. I know Mike's very active on that. And thank you, Young, and the work that you guys did at CI&T to really bring a lot of this to life. So thanks, folks, for joining us, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.